Before we begin, subscribe for more chilling stories and tell me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. The float plane skimmed the glassy surface of Sitka Sound, engines droning a dirge as it taxied toward the dock, amid a veil of mist that clung to the islands like a shroud. Thomas leaned against the vibrating fuselage, his reflection fractured in the salt-flecked window, eyes hollowed by the endless gray. He had abandoned Portland's fog-choked streets for this archipelago outpost, where Russian onion domes pierced the evergreens and the sea exhaled breaths of ancient brine. The wreck replayed in his mind, his brother David's skiff splintering against the basalt in a rogue river swell, David's cry swallowed by the churn as Thomas watched from the shore, too paralyzed to cast a line. The coroner deemed it swift, a rogue wave's mercy, but Thomas bore the scar of hesitation, his shout arriving seconds too late. Sitka promised erasure, a weathered bunkhouse on the edge of the Thimbleberry Lakes Trail, where the forest's hush might mute the accusations. He stepped onto the pier as the tide slurped at pilings, the town's spires looming through the drizzle like forgotten sentinels. The bunkhouse hunkered amid salal thickets, its shakes silvered by rain, door hanging ajar on leather hinges. Inside, the space reeked of pine tar and stale smoke, bunks stacked like coffins, a single lantern casting jittery pools on plank floors scarred by boot heels. Thomas claimed the corner cot, unfolding David's fishing knife onto the rough-hewn table, its blade nicked from years of gutting salmon. He struck a match to the oil stove, blue flame hissing defiance against the damp. Outside, the sound murmured against the breakwater, a ceaseless lap that echoed heartbeats. That inaugural evening, as Thomas nursed a tin mug of coffee spiked with rum, the murmurs stirred, not from the waves alone, but from the underbrush fringing the trail, leaves rustling in patterns too rhythmic for breeze. They were subtle, woven into the drip of eaves, shaping phonemes he attributed to settling timber. Anchor, they sighed, or maybe hunger. He stepped onto the stoop, scanning the gloam, but the lakeside lay barren, save for a raven's silhouette on a driftwood throne, its beak parted in silent judgment. Slumber fractured, the bunkhouse creaking in sympathy with his unrest. Visions gripped him. David not dashed, but dangling from kelp strands, face upturned, lips bubbling pleas lost to the foam. He roused to a morning swathed in low fog, the sound a pewter sheet. Thomas shouldered his pack and ventured the trail, craving the bite of chill to hone his dulled remorse. The path wound through fern-choked glades, exposing moss-veiled boulders that wept rivulets like tears. He pressed northward, skirting the skeletal husks of cedar snags, clawing skyward. There he discerned the initial irregularity, a rift in the loamy soil along the lake shore, not from root upheaval, but intentional, forking inland toward the thicket with eerie symmetry. Compulsion drew him near, his fingers parting deft to trace the gash. It splintered into veins, shadowed by subtle indents in the earth, footfalls, yet malformed, arches flattened as if from perpetual crouch, toes curled like hooks. Thomas trailed it, the murmurs resurging, interlacing the trill of hidden warblers. They carried intent now, a susurrus of summons. His breath hitched, the familiar dread resurfacing, the self-doubt that had festered since the wreck, rendering every choice a potential doom. Mirage of mourning, no doubt, spawned by seclusion and self-reproach. The rift guided to a dell cupped by thimbleberry brambles, a shallow basin draped in lichen veils. At its midst, nestled an item, snared in vine, a carved bone whistle, ivory-hued and etched with raven wings, cord frayed to threads. Thomas extracted it, the hollow reed chilling his palm like a fever's onset. Inscribed along its length, 1842, and glyphs, totem script, perhaps Tlingit, evoking spirits of the drowned. As his lips ghosted the mouthpiece, a tremor shot through him, and the murmurs honed to a lone imperative: blow. He released it into the leaves, staggering back, veins thrumming. The sound seemed to contract, brambles arching taller, their barbs whispering collusion. Thomas hasted to the bunkhouse, latching the portal against the rising gust. Merely a curio, he posited an heirloom from the fur trade era, dislodged by burrowing vole. But as he kindled the lantern anew, disquiet wound deep. The knife on the table gleamed oddly, edge honed as if by unseen whetstone, and beyond the thicket murmured persistent, as though the glade concealed observers, vigilant and veiled. Time eroded into a blur of patrols and precarious pacts with the wild, Thomas skirting the lakeside by rote to evade the thickening dusk, the bunkhouse a tenuous redoubt from the thicket's unyielding call. He evaded the dell at outset, tethering himself to the breakwater where gulls squabbled over chum, but journals brimmed with hasty renderings, David's profile in ink, gaze sharpened to rebuke, the river's tumult sketched in slashing arcs. Remorse suppurated like gangrene, each snap of twig conjuring David's final flail, his own delay in summoning aid. Sitka's rhythm yielded meager solace. The harbor nestled in misty folds, its lanes slick with herring scales and onion-dumb shadows, canneries resounding with yarns from scarred skippers. At the St. Michael's alehouse, amid the fug of net mending, one-eyed trapper Finn sloshed him ale, his scarred brow furrowing at Thomas's gaunt frame. Fresh off the float, Finn growled, scraping a mug etched with wave motifs. Thomas alluded to the bunkhouse, the rift. Finn's guffaw grated like anchor chain. That thicket's got tongues, mate. Trappers chase pelts, surfaced empty. Some sank silent. Thomas inquired, but Finn deflected, peering through the salt-crusted pane where fog masked the sound, grumbling of vanished crews and fires that kindled sand spark under the moon. That twilight the murmurs amplified, infiltrating the bunkhouse's chinks like sap seep. Thomas lurched bolt upright, the chamber bathed in lunar silver filtering through salt-stiffened curtains, whites and silvers coiling into aberrant whirls. No mere susurrus now, they splintered into colloquii, layering in the stove's cooling coals. He called the storm, a timber splintered, feminine and frayed. Sound the hunt, boomed another, guttural with tide and toil. Thomas mashed fists to skull, but the Locutans tunneled inward, exhuming the wreck, oars splintering on swell, David's desperate lunge for the thwart, his petrified bellow. Insanity's onset, or an elder venom rousing from the peat. Aurora chased him to the lakeside, the whistle waded in his vest like a keel of qualms. The rift had broadened to a furrow, meandering profounder into the break, hemmed by those contorted indents, anthropic yet protracted, arches bowed as if laden with spectral seine. The murmurs lured, hauling like lunar poles. Nearer, they coaxed, and Thomas complied. Fog girdling his calves, ether densifying with loam and lightning's aftertang, the way bifurcated into maze-like spurs, each incised with frosty sigils that shimmered dimly. The susurrations navigated, heartbeat harmonizing to their throb. The break disclosed a gorge, precipitous beyond the dell, fringed not by bramble, but by whalebone shards, hunters' discards arrayed in enigmatic webs. At the gorge's gut squatted a contour, enshrouded in haze, undulating with measured cadence. Thomas stalled, exhalation clouding the crisp. It was a woman, or its vestige, margins dissolving into gleam, tresses like sodden bull kelp encasing traits that aped the whistle's glyphs. She wheeled, orbs-paired abysses of abyssal ink fastening his, proffering a hand webbed with veinous scars, disclosing a lesion throbbing with inner tide. "You heed the call," she avowed, voice the throng embodied, resounding in his marrow. Thomas's stance quavered, this eclipsed bereavement's phantasm, the ether distorted encircling her, cedars inclining as in reverence, turf pulsing like a net under strain. Remorse inundated, blistering. David's submersion was his transgression, and this phantasm reflected it, her dirge a doublet to his contrition. "He drifts beneath," the eidolon breathed, inclining to the duff at her feet, where it sundered to unveil flickers of nacre, a harpoon barb, digits clenched in perpetual snare. Dread throttled Thomas's gorge. He bolted, gorge flanks compressing, thorns rending like phantasmal warps. The bunkhouse embraced with spurious geniality, yet he shored the ingress with a sea chest, heaving, whistle searing his flank. The murmurs stalked, embedding in the joists, the very mist he drew. Night descended with lunar ire, orbs of pallor throbbing fitfully, and Thomas sundered the knife, facets scattering like dashed spray. In the splinters, David's visage proliferated, jowls aligning to the murmurs. "Why did you let the waves claim me?" The equinox gale detonated in apocalyptic wrath, spindrift scourging the bunkhouse like a barrage of indictments, zephyrs shrieking through the eaves in a requiem of wrath. Thomas hadn't dozed, hadn't dined. The rum flasks sprawled depleted on the planking, warred into his splintering resolve. The murmurs had proliferated, unbound to the thicket. They welled from the cistern, rhymed the portals into lattice visages that melted beneath his scrutiny, reconstituted in the vapor of his pant. Dread enshrouded him wholly, every sway a stalker, every beam's lament a tread advancing. He clasped the whistle, its cord knotted round his wrist like a holster, the glyphs woman crystallizing into vivid indictment. Lena Kwan, 1842, Tlingit diver lost to a whaler's capsize, her vigilance congealing into this tidal coven. Who was she? A trade-era specter, akin to Finn's truncated sagas? Or a refraction of his liability, the wreck's reverberation in brined guise? David's inflection interlaced the chorus at length, incisive and impeaching. "You sounded the retreat, Thomas. Plunge with me." He reeled to the embrasure, streaking the cane with urgent swipes, to disclose the lakeside below, transmuted by the maelstrom. Gale bursts clove the murk, bearing the gorge as a convulsing quag, duff astir with agitation, contours emerging, demi-tangible, raking from the fissures. They were souls, throngs of them, diaphanous and frayed, their molds knit from brine and bereavement. Stairs riddling on the bunkhouse with rapacious luster. Thomas's breast vice-gripped. Chimera ceased. The ether glutted with their essence, the chamber plunging to hypothermic, hoarfrost inscribing emblems on the rafters, harpoons, dates, slivers of hunts interred. One emblem prevailed, gouged abyssal, Lena Kwan, Hunt 12. The whistle's warden, belike, engulfed in a pod's tumult, her vigilance crystallizing into this lunar legion. But why him? Why this gale? Penitence retorted, a brackish deluge. For he was sibling to them, errant, framer of a downfall resounding through the straits. The jam quaked, not from blast, but from clutches, knuckle-boned, kelp-scarred phalanges twisting the hasp, cuticles flaying timber like murmurs incised in bone. Thomas withdrew, whistle palpitating against his artery, Lena's lineaments no longer veiled but incandescent with arraignment. "You net the night," she intoned, inflection inundating the void, kindred rates corroborating in ethereal accord. David substantiated amongst them, his mold keenest, oilskins drenched with spume, wreck wheels striping his frame in indigo. "Redeem," he framed, though his regard decreed the antithesis, perfidy, unceasing. Thomas howled, hurtling the whistle into the gale. It detonated in a fount of spindrift, spawning a maelstrom of sleet that abraded his hide like censures. The wraiths pressed, thresholds shattering asunder, their saline sighs glazing his alveoli. He careened sternward, beyond the scullery where platters clanged like gaff strikes erupting into the onslaught. Spindrift seared, zephyrs stifling the plaints as he careered down the trail. The gorge summoned unyielding, channeling him to its maw where the duff yawned like a trawl. Lena towered there, amalgamating to tendon and tempest, limb extended. "Haul it," she ordained, and Thomas fathomed. The falter, the flinch, his tenure, all to be reeled into the pod's purse. He toppled at the lip, the crevice expanding underfoot, David's physiology ascending in the loam, his talon materializing to drag him seaward. Torrents of duff subsumed his frame, inexorable and encompassing, murmur swelling to tempests of enticement. As the gulf ingested him, Thomas perceived the dread disintegrate, usurped by an absolute, submerging quiescence, the strait's remission, or its consummate guile. Thin unearthed, the bunkhouse forsaken with the ebb, whistle shards borne off in the spate. Sitka's thickets murmured forth, their brambles veiling one more snare, the calls biding the next angler adrift. The salt air clung to Alex's skin like a second shadow as he rolled into Homer under a sky bruised with evening cloud. Kachemek Bay breathed in long, tidal swells against the finger of the spit, and along the road, weather-beaten fronts and stacked crab pots threw ragged silhouettes. He had come to the end of the road to outrun Chicago's concrete and the silence that followed the crash, the kind of silence that wore his wife's voice and said it was his fault. His rental sat near the base of the spit, a squat, clapboard cottage braced by wind-sculpted berms tufted with dune grass. Inside smelled of damp wood and old salt. A single bulb hummed like an insect. He unpacked a one-bag life, bourbon, sketchbook, a photograph of Emily with a crease through her smile, and tried to pretend he was starting over. He walked at dusk when the tide fell away, exposing dark sand and pea gravel stitched with eelgrass. The bay sounded less like surf and more like breathing. That's when he heard it, a low murmur riding the wash below the berms, not the slap of chop, but something softer, deliberate, as if words had been braided into foam. He leaned into the wind, told himself it was gusts combing the grass like harpstrings, and turned back. Sleep came in scraps, full of broken glass and headlights. In one dream, Emily lay half-buried, her eyes open and bright with the kind of pleading he couldn't answer. He woke sweating to find her photo on the nightstand tilted, as if a passing hand had brushed it awry. Morning limped in the color of zinc. Out past the charter docks, gulls kited in the wind, and a raft of otters rolled like thumbed coins. Alex took the strand along the spit, where old pilings stuck from the shallows like rotten teeth, keeping his mind busy with anything but the wreck. That was when he saw the first mark. A furrow in the wet sand, too straight for a stream, too deep for a tire, then curving inland toward the berms as if whatever made it had changed its mind. He followed. The furrow widened into a trail, and to either side impressions appeared. Almost footprints, but wrong. Toes splay as if for water. Heels narrow and dragging. The murmurs came back in the hush between wave and draw. He told himself it was the wind again, or the far buzz of a dredge, and kept walking until the berms opened into a shallow bowl of driftwood and long bleached ribs from a whale no one remembered. In the center, half buried, a dull glint. A locket, oval and silver, its chain snapped. He knelt and thumbed it free. Inside, beneath fogged glass, a woman's face stared from a century away. Blurred by brine and time, eyes made of emptiness. Cold shot up his arm. The murmur sharpened, fused to a single word that didn't pass through his ears, so much as arrive behind them. Mine. He dropped the locket. The bowl of sand seemed to tip. Grass hissed like an audience tired of waiting. He backed out, then turned and ran, boots chewing the slope, wind clawing his jacket. Safe inside the cottage, he bolted the door and laughed once, a dry bark that wasn't convincing. Lost jewelry worked loose by a storm. Nothing more. He poured bourbon with both hands and missed the glass on the first try. The photograph of Emily looked at him from the table corner, the crease across her mouth like a cut. He nudged it square, then left it crooked again because that felt truer. The murmurs went thin and far away, as if the bay had rolled off and taken them with it. When the bulb flickered, he told himself it was the wind. Days collapsed into a tide table he didn't mean to keep. Drink, draw, walk, don't think. When he tried to work, storyboards and faces for products he didn't care about, every jawline turned into Emily's. Every eye looked past him to something he couldn't fix. Outside, the bay changed faces by the hour. Glass, gunmetal, chopped jade. Homer in shoulder season was a town of lists tacked to corkboards. Missing dogs, tide charts, part-time cannery shifts if you could stand the smell. At a bar on the spit, with the sign so scoured you could only tell what it used to say by the nail holes, Alex told the bartender Harlan about the berms without telling him about the voice. Harlan poured a neat and gave the kind of nod that meant this wasn't the first strange thing to walk in off the tide. These sands collect things, he said. Sometimes they keep them, sometimes they give them back wrong. The second night, the murmurs didn't wait for dark. They moved through the floorboards and up the walls as if the cottage itself was a throat. Alex pressed his palms over his ears and found the sound under his hands anyway. Not a crowd this time, but overlapping voices close enough to breathe on his neck. He took her. Stay. Join us. Deeper. He shoved a chair under the door handle because it felt like doing something, then lasted an hour before jerking it aside and staggering out into salt sleet. The furrow was a road now. It split into two, then three tracks that braided and unbraided like kelp. The prints grew clearer, human, yet not. Toes webbed wide, heel narrow and skidded, as if they belonged to something that resented leaving the water even for a few steps. He followed until the berms shouldered open around a constellation of hollows, 3, then 5, each ringed with driftwood and bones. Gull skulls with beaks like knives, fish vertebrae stitched into spirals, seal ribs making ribs of their own. In the middle of the largest, steam peeled off the sand as if it were breathing. She sat there, rocking in a rhythm that had nothing to do with wind. Her edges were smudged, hair hanging in ropes like wet kelp. The idea of a dress clung to her the way fog clings to pilings. She turned when she wanted to, not when he arrived. The face from the locket looked up and became a person while it looked. Where her eyes should have been were milked over hollows that still managed to fix him. "You hear us," she said, and though her lips moved, the voice came from all the places a voice shouldn't. From the grain in the driftwood, from the fine crackle of drying kelp, from the wet rasp of sand collapsing an inch at a time. She raised a hand. In its center, instead of blood, sand leaked in a thin, steady thread, as if the cut opened onto a beach of its own. She waits below. The surface at her feet twitched, grains parted, and Alex saw a pale curb like the back of a knuckle, a fingernail, the quick curl of a finger withdrawing as if embarrassed to be seen. He stumbled backward and ran crooked, catching his boot on a buried line and tearing his knee open enough to feel heat in the cold. He didn't remember reaching the cottage, only the raw of his throat and the taste of rust. That evening, the power blinked under a gale that climbed Cook Inlet, and the cottage found new ways to talk. A drip inside the wall that clicked a steady code, pipes sighing in a vocabulary older than plumbing. He tore open the photograph frame and held Emily's picture bare in his hands. He wanted to ask the paper a question without saying it out loud. The glass broke in his fingers. In each shard, her mouth made a different shape: surprise, hurt, the round O of the moment before a name. He bled on the table without noticing. The wind shoved its shoulder against the cottage, and something else tested the door like a patient animal. The locket in his pocket grew hot, then hotter, and then it stopped feeling like heat and started feeling like intention. He didn't sleep. He watched the black window turn night into a mirror that showed a man in a rented house on land that belonged to the tide. Just before dawn, frost drew on the inside of the glass. Not fern or feather, but spirals, names, dates, a long list of the missing. He pressed his thumb to one and smeared it. The letters rewrote themselves when he took his hand away. Eliza Thorne, 1923. The locket lay on the table as if it had placed itself there.
The front hit at noon with a wall of rain that felt like grit, and a wind that found every seam the carpenter had missed. Alex wrapped the locket's chain around his wrist until it bit, and waited for the part of fear that makes you move. When it came a stillness. He walked out into the slant, head down, following the only lines that made sense anymore: the furrows in the sand. The berms opened for him as if he had finally remembered the password. The hollow steamed though the air was cold. Bones clicked against one another with the small, precise sounds instruments make when they're being tuned. They were all there now, the tattered women with faces sewn from spindrift in memory, the ones the tide had kept and returned wrong. They were not the same, and yet they were the same, in the way wreckage is the same after the sea is finished choosing. Emily stood among them without looking like them, her edges clean, her dress clinging with the weight of water. The purple band around her throat made him feel something he wasn't ready to name. The door he hadn't locked gave up somewhere behind him. He heard wood give and a chair fall and understood in a distant way that there would be nothing to go back to if he chose to go back. Eliza stepped forward until the wind lost interest in her, until the rain fell around her and not on her. "You carry us," she said. And it was true in the small way and in the big one. He carried a locket, and he carried the moment he should have looked sideways and didn't. "What do you want?" The question came out flat under the wind. She didn't answer like a person. The sand answered. It yawned in the center of the hollow and slid without collapsing, making a throat that went down and down but somehow stayed open. Cold breathed up from it with the smell of iron in old tides. From that throat rose a hand made of many hands, grains arranged into palm and fingers, nails black with sea stain. It waited. When the wind paused, heard the water far out on the bar, and under that, something that might have been a voice saying his name as if trying it on. "Bury it," Eliza said, and he knew she didn't mean the locket. He dropped to his knees because standing up felt undishonest. The sand at the edge slid away from his weight as if eager. He placed the locket on the rim of the hole, and it didn't stay. It slid toward the center and was gone without falling, like a coin into thick water. He took Emily's photograph out of his pocket, not the one he'd broken, but the photo behind the photo, the one he had sworn he wasn't carrying. He put it down and it followed the locket. He took the memory of the wreck as far as he could with something as clumsy as hands and put that down too. It slid away and was gone, and nothing in him felt lighter. The sand climbed his shins. It did not feel like being buried. It felt like being held in place by a decision he had already made. The women watched with the still attention of birds. Harlan's voice arrived where voices shouldn't, the way Eliza's had. A barroom rasp sharpened by cold. "Storm shifting. Tide's turning. Last chance." He didn't turn his head. He didn't answer. He let the sand take his knees. He let it take his hips. Emily lifted her hand, and it was the same hand he had held across a parking lot the first time they tried and failed to leave a party early. He reached for it because that's what you do when a hand you love is held out. Their fingers touched. The whole hollow inhaled. If there was a peace at the bottom of it, it wasn't the kind that forgives. It was the kind that accepts. He went down with the sound the bay makes when the bar breaks, and for a moment longer than a moment, he was sure there was another beach below this one where the tide never turned and the voices were only voices and not needs. If he answered them, he didn't do it out loud. Days later, when the front had blown itself bald and the spit lay bright and raw under an unhelpful sun, Harlan walked the Strand because someone had to. The cottage door hung from one hinge. Inside, damp, a chair on its side, a silver sliver on the floor so clean it looked new. He pocketed it without looking. On his way back, he stopped where the berms make a shallow bowl out of wind and bone. The hollows were only hollows. Grass whispered like grass. Harlan stood long enough to feel foolish, then longer still. When he finally turned, the sand shifted under his boot and offered up an oval shape with a broken chain. He didn't pick it up. He tamped it back into place with his heel, like you do when you cover a campfire you hope will stay out. That night, as the weather radio scrolled advisories no one listened to, the bay breathed like a sleeping thing. Along the berms, the ridges murmured the same soft syllables they always had. If they said stay or stray, that was for someone else to decide. The tide chart for the morning showed a minus low, and men with buckets would come to pry clams from mud with fingers gone numb. Between the cuts their boots made and the marks the wind erased, there would be other trails. Some the sea would keep, some it would bring back wrong. The propellers of the ferry cut through the slate-gray waters of the inside passage like a dull knife, carving a path toward Ketchikan under a sky heavy with perpetual dusk. Sarah gripped the railing, her knuckles white against the chill that seeped from the fog-shrouded pines lining the fjords, their jagged peaks clawing at the clouds. She had fled Seattle's relentless rain for this northern exile, chasing the hollow promise of solitude and a town perched on the edge of the world where totem poles stood sentinel amid clapboard houses sagging under moss and memory. The accident haunted her still. Mark's truck skidding on black ice, high in the Cascades, his final shout lost to the roar of tumbling rock and snow. The avalanche had buried him in seconds, but Sarah carried the weight eternally, her fault for urging that last-minute detour, her voice the echo that doomed him. Ketchikan was meant to be penance, a rented cabin on the outskirts where the salmon runs thundered below and the aurora might light her way to absolution. She docked as twilight bled into night, the town's lights twinkling like distant stars fallen into the sea. The cabin squatted on a bluff overlooking Tongass Narrows, its logs darkened by decades of drizzle, windows fogged with the breath of ghosts. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of damp cedar and faint rot, the floor warped from endless moisture. Sarah unpacked her meager bag, placing Mark's pocket watch on the mantel, its hands frozen at the hour of the slide. She lit a fire in the stone hearth, flames dancing shadows across walls etched with old carvings, raven motifs, eyes that seemed to follow her. Outside, the fjord whispered against the rocks, a rhythmic susurrus that mimicked breath. That first night, as Sarah sipped black tea laced with whiskey, the whispers began. Not from the water, but from the ice encrusting the eaves, crystalline edges tinkling like distant chimes. They were faint at first, layered beneath the patter of rain, forming syllables she dismissed as wind through the spruces. Return, they breathed, or perhaps burn. She rose, peering into the gloom, but the bluff was empty, save for the black silhouette of a bald eagle perched on a snag, its gaze piercing the mist. Sleep evaded her, the cabin settling with sighs that matched her own ragged breaths. In dreams, Mark emerged not crushed, but encased in glacial blue, his face pressed against the ice, mouth forming pleas she couldn't hear. She woke to a dawn muted by low clouds, the fjord a mirror of lead. Sarah laced her boots and descended the slick trail to the water's edge, seeking the sting of cold to sharpen her numbed grief. The tide pulled in rocky crevices, exposing barnacle-crusted stones that gleamed like forgotten jewels. She walked south along the shore, past derelict fishing shacks leaning into the wind like weary penitents. There, she spotted the first anomaly, a fracture of thin ice sheet fringing the bay, not from a cracking flow, but
but deliberate, veining inward toward the tree line with unnatural precision. Intrigue tugged her closer, her breath fogging the air as she traced the split with gloved fingers. It branched into a network, accompanied by faint impressions in the mud. Boot prints, but distorted, soles too broad, toes pointed like those of someone forever wading through resistance. Sarah followed, the whiskers resurfacing, threading through the lap of waves and cry of gulls. They wove urgency now, a murmur of invitations. Her heart stuttered, the old paranoia resurfacing, the doubt that had gnawed since the avalanche, convincing her every decision was a betrayal. Hallucination, surely, born of isolation and regret. The fracture led to a cleft in the granite cliff, a shallow grotto veiled by hanging moss. At its core lay an object, embedded in frost, a silver compass, its glass cracked, needles spinning erratically. Sarah pried it free, the metal biting cold through her glove. Etched on the back was a date, 1897, and initials, J.R. Inside the lid, a sepia image of a man, bearded and stern, his eyes shadowed as if by perpetual night. As her thumb brushed the face, a shiver lanced her spine, and the whispers sharpened to a solitary command. Guide. She recoiled, dropping the compass into the snow, pulse thundering in her ears. The fjord seemed to narrow, cliffs pressing closer, their faces scarred with ancient petroglyphs that twisted in the wind. Sarah scrambled back to the cabin, bolting the door against the gathering squall. It was merely an artifact, she reasoned, a miner's relic from the gold rush unearthed by thaw. Yet as she warmed her hands by the fire, unease coiled tight. The watch on the mantel ticked unevenly now, as if syncing to an unseen rhythm, and outside, the ice whispered on, insistent, as if the cliffs themselves harbored watchers, patient and unblinking.
Weeks dissolved into a fog of ritual and restraint. Sarah rationing daylight hikes to outpace the encroaching dark, the cabin a fragile bastion against the fjord's relentless murmur. She shunned the shore initially, confining herself to the bluff where spruces whispered banal secrets. But sketches filled her journals. Mark's face rendered in charcoal, eyes hollowed by accusation, the avalanche's chaos captured in frantic strokes. Guilt festered like an untreated wound, every rustle of leaves evoking his last breath, her delay in calling for help. Ketchikan's pulse offered scant reprieve. The town huddled in rainy veils, its streets slick with fish guts and totem lore, saloons echoing with tales from weathered trappers. At the totem bar, amidst a haze of pipe smoke, grizzled fisherman Elias poured her a stout, his one good eye appraising her pallor. New to the Narrows, he grunted, polishing a glass smeared with fingerprints. Sarah mentioned the cabin, the ice. Elias's chuckle rumbled like shifting scree. That fjord's got echoes, lass. Prospectors went in for gold, came out hollow. Some never came out. She probed, but he shrugged, glancing at the window where mist cloaked the water, muttering of lost expeditions and lights that danced unbidden under the borealis. That evening, the whispers intensified, infiltrating the cabin's seams like frostbite's creep. Sarah jerked awake, the room awash in auroral glow seeping through the skylight, greens and purples twisting into unnatural coils. No longer mere sounds, they fragmented into dialogues, overlapping in the hearth's dying embers. He led them, a voice cracked, masculine and raw. Follow the vein, intoned another, resonant with gravel and greed. Sarah pressed palms to her temples, but the phrases burrowed, resurrecting the slide. Tires spinning on ice, Mark's frantic grab for the wheel, her frozen scream. Was this unraveling or an older malice stirring in the glacial deep? Morning dragged her to the shore, the compass heavy in her coat pocket like a lodestone of dread. The fracture had widened into a chasm, snaking deeper into the woods, flanked by those warped prints, human yet elongated, heels sunk as if burdened by unseen ore. The whispers beckoned, tugging like auroral currents. Deeper, they urged, and Sarah yielded, mist coiling around her ankles, air thickening with the tang of wet earth and ozone.
The path forked into labyrinthine trails, each etched with icy runes that gleamed faintly. The murmurs steered her, pulse sinking to their cadence. The woods yielded to a ravine, steeper than the first, bordered not by moss but by quartz shards, miners' leavings, arranged in cryptic lattices. At the nadir crouched the silhouette, wreathed in vapor, swaying with deliberate rhythm. Sarah halted, breath pluming in the freeze. It was a man, or its echo, edges fraying into luminescence, beard like hoarfrost, framing features that echoed the compass's portrait. He pivoted, eyes twin voids of northern starlight pinning hers, extending a palm veined with frozen rivers, revealing a scar pulsing with inner frost. "You seek the light," he declared, voice the multitude incarnate, reverberating in her bones. Sarah's legs trembled. This transcended sorrow's mirage. The air warped around him, spruces bowing as if in obeisance, ground quivering like a vein under pressure. Guilt flooded, scalding. Mark's burial was her sin, and this specter mirrored it, his lament a twin to her remorse. "He freezes below," the wraith murmured, nodding to the snow at his boots, where it fractured to expose glints of metal, a pickaxe haft, fingers rigid in eternal grip. Terror seized Sarah's throat. She fled, ravine walls constricting, branches lashing like spectral chains. The cabin welcomed her with deceptive warmth, but she wedged the door with a log, gasping, compass scorching her thigh. The echoes pursued, embedding in the rafters, the very chill she inhaled. Dusk fell with auroral fury, veils of light pulsing erratically, and Sarah shattered the watch, gears spilling like spilled blood. In the fragments, Mark's face multiplied, lips sinking to the whispers. "Why did you bury me alive?"
The borealis erupted in cataclysmic splendor, ribbons of fire lashing the sky above Ketchikan, illuminating the fjord in strobing veils of emerald and violet that twisted into leering visages. Sarah hadn't slumbered, hadn't supped. The whiskey flask lay drained on the floor, guardian to her fraying sanity. The echoes had metastasized, no longer bound to the ice. They oozed from the pipes, crystallized on window panes into fractal faces that thawed under her gaze, reformed in the steam of her breath. Paranoia enveloped her utterly. Every flicker a pursuer, every groan of timber a bootfall nearing. She gripped the compass, its chain looped about her neck like a noose, the miner's image clarifying into stark relief. Josiah Reed, 1897, lost to a claim collapse, his greed curdling into this luminous curse. Who was he? A Rush-era phantom, like Elias's half-told yarns? Or a projection of her culpability, the avalanche's echo in frozen form? Mark's timbre wove into the chorus finally, crisp and condemning. "You guided me wrong, Sarah. Descend with me." She lurched to the casement, fogging the glass with frantic wipes to reveal the shore below, reborn in the light's frenzy. Aurora bolts rent the dark, unveiling the ravine as a seething morass. Ice alive with motion, figures ascending, semi-corporeal, clawing from the crevices. They were men, scores of them, luminous and ragged, their shapes woven from phosphorescence and perdition. Gazes locked on the cabin with voracious gleam. Sarah's chest constricted, delusion no more. The air congealed with their aura, the room plummeting to sub-zero, rhymes scripting sigils on the beams, claims, dates, shards of avarice entombed. One inscription dominated, incised, profound. Josiah Reed, claim 47. The bearer, perhaps, smothered in a shaft's ruin, his hunger crystallizing into this boreal host. But why her? Why this night? Remorse replied, a glacial torrent, for she was kin to them, wayward, architect of a demise resounding through the peaks. The threshold shuddered, not from gale,
but from grips. Calloused, frostbitten digits wrenching the latch, nails gouging timber like echoes etched in stone. Sarah retreated, compass throbbing against her pulse. Josiah's visage no longer shadowed, but aflame with indictment. "You hoard the dark," he proclaimed, timber flooding the space, fellow shades affirming in spectral harmony. Mark materialized amid them, his form sharpest, flannel sodden with melt, avalanche scars veining his skin in blue. "Absolve," he shaped, yet his stare proclaimed the inverse, treachery, interminable. Sarah wailed, flinging the compass into the blaze. It erupted in a geyser of sparks, birthing a vortex of sleet that scourged her flesh like recriminations. The shades advanced, portal fracturing ajar, their gelid exhalations icing her veins. She dashed aft, past the galley where utensils clattered like pick strikes, bursting into the tempest. Aurora blinded, thunder muffled the keens as she hurtled down the trail. The ravine beckoned unresisting, funneling her to its abyss, where the ice gaped like a maw. Josiah loomed there, coalescing to sinew and spite, arm proffered. "Stake it," he decreed, and Sarah comprehended. The fault, the detour, her existence, all to be pegged in the crevice's claim. She crumpled at the brink, the fissure dilating beneath, Mark's countenance rising in the frost, his grasp surfacing to haul her under. Cascades of rhyme swallowed her limbs, unyielding and absolute, echoes crescendoing to gales of summons. As the gulf devoured her, Sarah sensed the paranoia fracture, supplanted by an utter, entombing serenity. The peak's parting, or its ultimate snare? Elias discovered the cabin vacant come thaw. Compass shards vanished in the melt. Ketchikan's fjords echoed onward, their ice concealing one more vein, the lights awaiting the next seeker astray.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories.